This is Red and April Off Grid. Welcome to our channel. We are building our own home in the Arizona desert. We are completely off the grid and are doing all of the work ourselves. In the last video, we completed the metal roof beams and purlins. In this video, we are finishing the ceiling strapping and starting to put up the exterior wall sheeting. If you want to follow our DIY home build, be sure to give us a thumbs up and hit the subscribe.
We pick up here with me working on the strapping. I'm pre-drilling the holes and getting these pieces of 1x4 ready to go up on the roof. Now, since we're attaching these to these metal beams, I have to pre-drill and countersink for every hole where it connects to the beam. So I'm using a self-tapping screw to connect here. It's a little bit smaller than I used on the purlins up top, but it's still a heavy-duty self-tapping screw. It has a washer head, so it's a pretty low profile, but a nice big washer head, so it gets a lot of contact with the 1x4. And all I was able to get was 8-foot lengths, and so ended up taking about 112, 115 1x4s to do the entire ceiling of the house. But the 8-foot length works out pretty good because it ends up the 4-foot centers that the beams are laid out on. So that all works out pretty well, so there's not a lot of waste. The hard part about doing these is you're doing all the work overhead, and you actually have to put a lot of force when you're trying to get these self-tapping screws to go into the metal, and so that was quite a strain on my shoulders. So April came out and was giving me a hand here, but like I say, it's really difficult to do. You just have to kind of really put all your strength into it to get them to start. One thing that we learned how to do was to use a clamp to kind of help hold it in place. And that helped a lot. We just clamped it to the beam in the middle, and then I would get on one side and April would get on the other, and we try to get the screws on the ends put in and then try to get the screws in the middle put in after that. But the clamp definitely helped. Otherwise, it was wanting to move all over, and especially when you're trying to get those screws started, they want to walk a little bit, and so it was really hard to keep it in place, so the clamp definitely helped. The strapping was a bit of a pain, especially in the shoulders, but overall it didn't take too long. It was about a couple days to get it finished up.
Good morning, y'all. Beautiful day here in southern Arizona.
At long last, we're finally ready to get started on the exterior sheeting. Really been looking forward to this because that's when it really starts to feel like a house, when you kind of get it closed in. So should all go pretty fast. I plan to just board right over windows and doors and then come back in with a router and cut those holes out. So we'll see how that goes. But I'm hoping this will go pretty fast. The first thing to do is to kind of reorganize the work site and clean up the work site since we're transitioning. So we wanted to move the foam out of the way. We had everything kind of wrapped up really tight. The bad weather we had there for a little while, so just kind of get everything uncovered and reorganized to be working with this sheeting. We had some leftover vapor barrier from the floor, and that's the black plastic that we had covering everything up, and that stuff worked great. It was really thick, it held up to the wind, and our sheeting was perfectly dry, which I was relieved about. Getting my nail gun all set up and ready to go here and kind of transition into the sheeting. One thing I realized just before I got started on the sheeting was that I need to put in a few more 2x4 studs in order to have a place to properly attach the interior drywall or whatever interior wall sheeting we're going to have. And so basically when you do a construction like this, at the corners there's a place where you have to add a stud just so you have something in that corner to attach the drywall to on both sides of the wall. I had to add a couple of boards here on the back side, so that's what I'm doing now, putting in a couple studs. And then we started with the sheeting. So we wanted to get one piece in place to stabilize that side of the wall, and then we can start taking off the cross bracing as we work our way across the wall. So the sheeting, when it's attached properly with a bunch of these nails, will take the place of these cross braces. And so that was kind of our plan, is to take the cross bracing off as we moved along with the sheeting. After getting the first piece up on the sidewall, we moved over to the back of the house. It is so nice having this nailer. I'm putting in a bunch of nails here, probably a nail every 6 to 8 inches. It goes so fast. In the past, I've used screws, which aren't the proper thing to use. You're really supposed to use nails for structural reasons, but it took way longer too. So anyway, the nailer is great. As we move along, we just take off the braces that we need to, and so that way the house remains fully braced and it's actually getting stronger and stronger as we build it. So for all the sheeting on this side, I had to cut 1.5 inches off the top, and so it's basically 8 foot to the bottom of the beam, but I don't want this first piece of sheeting to go to the bottom of the beam. I want it to go to the top of the first of the top rail boards, and the reason I want that is because that leaves a little bit for the next piece of sheeting that I'm going to put above that goes in between the beams to tie in the top board of the top rail to that block board and to the purlin that goes along the top of the beams. And that way I get a better tie-in from that board that goes across the top of the beams all the way down to the foundation. So tying in that whole wall right down to the foundation for extreme wind resistance. So that was my thinking here. I might also mention here that the 2 layers of the top plate are held together by the big bolts that each beam is attached through. So each beam has bolts going through both layers of the top rail, so through both layers of wood, 3 inches of wood there. So those 2 layers are tied together well, and so that both pieces of plywood have a whole board to grab onto, and then that board is clamped together by all those bolts and then also by nails and screws, so it should be quite a strong connection. Well, the sheeting is going up pretty fast like I hoped it would. Since I only have to cut the top of the board, they just go on one right after the other, and it goes on pretty quickly. A little bit more about the nails I'm using. So I'm using a galvanized nail, since you need those to go into the treated wood at the bottom, and I didn't want to have to be switching out every time for every board, so I'm just using the galvanized nails for everything. They're rib nails, so they bite real good. They're 2 inches long, so they make it have 1.5 inches of contact into the stud. And I'm using those, like I say, they're really tightly spaced together. So 2 of the little strips that go into my nail gun, I'm using almost 2 strips in each panel. So I'm putting a lot of nails in, and all that gives a lot of shear strength to the wall and makes it incredibly strong. I mentioned in previous videos that the footer is not exactly perfectly level. We built the footer, we were thinking aircrete house, and we'd have poured aircrete walls, and so it ended up being, about 1 inch off over the width of the house. And so you can see that when you're putting these panels up. They'll be just a little bit off one to the other as it follows that kind of dip in the foundation. So that was a little bit of annoying and something you can have to work around a little bit here. Here I am. I just have to measure out and put on this one more piece, and I'll have the north side of the house all finished up. So I've been using a cordless saw on this build for the first time. So I bought my first ever cordless saw especially for this build. It's really amazing. So it's a Metabo, and the reason I went with this, or one of the reasons, is because it has the capacity to have a really huge battery. So it's a 18 or 36 volt system, and so this particular battery can go either way, 18 or 36 volts. And it's a humongous battery, so it's a 8 amp battery, so it's gigantic in capacity. And in fact, I was able to do most of the framing on this house on one charge. I would say 70% of the framing of this house I did on one battery charge. That's how good this battery is. And so that's what I've been using to do all this, and it's really been a pleasure. It's been so nice to have a cordless saw that I can just carry around with me and use. The battery lasts an extremely long time. It's a powerful little saw at 2.5 or 2 3/4 inch cut depth, and it'll actually cut that deep through pine, so it's quite powerful. Anyway, it's been a fantastic little saw, and I'm pretty spoiled to be able to have it. This project was kind of my justification to upgrade my tool there. Working my way across the sidewall of the house now, and it's going pretty fast until I start having issues with the air hose. So this hose was almost new when I moved here, not even a year ago, and it hasn't been outside that much, but the sun is just eating this hose up. It is already seriously cracked and is starting to leak really badly. Already, I can't believe how fast the rubber is degrading. It must not have had any UV resistance whatsoever. But anyway, I ended up having to find another air hose and swap it all out and change out the fitting, so that took a little bit of time. Right above this window, I did find a 2x4 that I had in the wrong place. So, around the windows, I had to come in after I'd done the rough framing and put in studs above and below the window. And sure enough, there's one here that I had put in the wrong place, so I had to fix that, take it out, and replace it. I think this is the only place I did that, but that was a miss. One thing I might mention too, when we've been putting these panels up, is you're supposed to leave about 1/8 of an inch gap around the panel or between the panels. So we've been trying to do that, and so we use a little level sometimes to make sure it's level and that we maintain some gap as we go along. So we're making pretty good progress here. We have the first 8 foot of sheeting, or just kind of one piece of sheeting, up all along the north side and the west side. And I decided to take a break here and cut out some holes for the windows and doors, just as a little change of pace before we moved on to sheeting the rest. It's the next day and I'm ready to get started cutting out the holes for the windows and doors. So I've got my router here, I'm ready to go. I started out by drilling a couple pilot holes in the corners, and then I was ready to get started with my router. So this router is a old router that I've had for a good while. It was used when I bought it, but it's kind of an oldie but goodie. It was made back in probably the 50s or 60s. It's what they call a bullet router. It's a really cool looking router, and it's actually held up really well. It was very well made back in the day. It's a little scary to use because you can actually see like sparks and stuff in there. It's very kind of 50s technology. But it's holding up very well, and this is really hard on your router, so you're cutting out a pretty good swath of material all the way up and around the door, so it actually gets the router real hot. It's working it really hard. So for this type of work, you definitely want a router that's pretty heavy duty. I think 1.5 horsepower is about the right size to be doing this type of work. This is a router that I use to do kind of rough, heavy duty work, and it's got plenty of power and does a good job. I really liked using the router to cut these out. It left a good finish. It went pretty fast. I've tried several ways of doing this in the past. I've tried doing it with the Sawzall, kind of from the inside, using the 2x4 as a guide. And the saw blade always gets crooked, and you end up with these horrible wavy lines. But this way of doing this with the router bit, it's so nice. It just goes straight across. You get a nice, smooth, flush surface, and just a pleasure to do. It's like, why have I never done this before? This is definitely the best way. So anyway, I highly recommend using the router bit here. The router bit that I'm using here actually has a bearing on the inside, and so that's how it's able to kind of follow the contour of the wood, is it has a bearing that's following the wood on the inside, and then there's a cutter between the bearing and the router itself that's actually removing the material. After finishing up the hole for the door and the window on the back of the house, my router was hot, and so I figured I better move on to something else to let it cool. So I decided to start placing in the pieces in between the beams. I knew it was going to be some detail work, and so basically I'm carrying the sheeting on top of the pretty much full 8-foot piece that I put in, all the way up to the very top of the roof, and it'll tie in to the top of the purlin that's on top of the beams. And so I'm trying to tie in all this together. So I end up having to cut in a sheet that's a foot tall, or about 12 inches tall. And then there's a lot of detail work trying to cut it in around each beam, trying to go inside that C-channel on both sides. Each one took a lot of time. There's quite a bit of detail. And so I was kind of dreading this a little bit, thinking that it would be kind of a miserable project. But actually, after getting the first one or two done, you kind of get into a routine and learn what you need to do, and it actually went pretty fast. I think I was able to finish up about half of them, that afternoon, so it moved along pretty quick. So here you can see what that detail work looks like. On each side I'm having to cut out 2 notches to go around the metal wings that stick out on each of the I-beams, and then kind of get that all the right height and get those notches the right depth. And each one is a little bit different, so in between each of those beams I had to take special measurements and make a special piece that fit in there just perfect. So I got it as close as I could. There were still some small gaps. It didn't fit quite as tight as I would like, but it's within, I would say, 1/4 inch for the most part. And it doesn't have to be perfect. So the layers on top of this will be house wrap next, and then 2-inch foam, and then there'll be strapping on top of that, which is basically just 1x3 furring strip, and then on top of that will be the metal exterior siding.
Thanks so much for watching. We have a lot coming up, so be sure to subscribe and ring the little bell. Next, we will be finishing the siding and working on the roof and eaves.